to explain the 1955 coaxial power steering unit, Butch. There are two models used, one for Plymouth and Dodge and one for Chrysler and DeSoto cars.
Oh, and I thought you and Lloyd were going to rake me over the coals for something I did wrong, Tech.
Nope, you can relax, Butch. But what we have to tell you about this new unit may keep you on the right track when it comes to servicing a car with coaxial power steering. This is a honey of a unit, and we want to be sure our owners get all the smooth performance built into it.
Yeah, Butch, we're making real history. In their price class, Plymouth and Dodge are the only cars with an integral type full-time power steering unit.
Right. This gear has all parts except the pump and reservoir located around a common axis, which is why it's called coaxial power steering. And that's really going some. Some of the competitive cars still use linkage booster type units. So we're way out in front with the best.
What's more, servicing and adjusting's a lot easier now.
Easier service? Well, that I like. I'm for anything that gives us mechanics a break.
I don't blame you, Butch. Now, look at this. The new unit is mounted on the inside of the frame side rail. It's a sturdy setup and easy to line up whenever necessary. To align the gear in the car, loosen the steering column to instrument panel clamp bracket and the 3 mounting bolts. Then, tighten the clamp bracket. Swivel washers between the housing and frame permit the gear to align itself. Next, tighten the 2 front bolt nuts to 20 foot-pounds.
Don't tighten the rear bolt nut at this time, Butch.
Okay, Tech.
Now, install the tapered wedge between the frame side rail and gear housing at the rear bolt. Tap it lightly into place, and be sure the wedge is parallel to the center line of the steering column. If it isn't, you may snap the mounting lug off the gear housing when you tighten the nut.
Okay, it's in place.
Fine. Then tighten all 3 retaining bolt nuts to 50 foot-pounds.
I get it, Lloyd. And that procedure for aligning the steering gear will do away with any strain on the housing between the frame and instrument panel, right?
That it will, Butch. So always follow that procedure in just that way, and you'll have no alignment problems. Here's another feature you're going to like, Butch. There's big news on the inside of this new gear. The center of the worm is drilled out for its full length. That gives you room to use this slender tool to adjust the control valve.
In other words, Butch, you won't have to remove the unit from the car and partially disassemble it to adjust the control valve.
Say, that's really going to simplify that adjustment. Are the oil pump and reservoir new, too?
The reservoir is new, and the pump has a new mounting. The oil pump mounting to the generator has this adjustment feature. The 2 holes are slotted so you can move the pump through an arc to secure proper leveling of the reservoir.
Pump mounting bolts are handy, Butch. You can reach them with a socket wrench.
That's a big help. How about checking oil level?
Well, we should check oil level in the reservoir every 1,000 miles or 30 days.
But before you do, Butch, always wipe off the cover first.
I sure will, Tech. I know what dirt in the oil can do.
The oil level should be up to the top of the filter. Add automatic transmission fluid type A whenever it's needed.
Will do, Lloyd. Now, how about adjusting procedures?
Before you get into adjustments, Lloyd, let me say something, will you?
Go ahead, Tech.
Well, remember that front wheel alignment, proper lubrication, and tire pressure are as important as ever. Power steering isn't going to cover up for you on these points.
You're just as right as you can be, Tech. We don't want to make gear adjustments until we're sure wheel alignment is up to snuff and all parts are properly lubricated.
Okay. I'll remember to check the front end first. But what adjustments are there to this power steering unit?
Well, Butch, that depends on what you're trying to correct. What condition do you have in mind?
Well, I was just wondering about when the front wheels might tend to wander. Just enough to make an owner move the steering wheel all the time to hold the car straight ahead.
Well, I'd check backlash between the teeth of the sector gear and the lower piston rod first, Butch. If that was okay, I'd check the worm shaft bearing adjustment to see if there's any end play in the worm shaft. Then I'd check the adjustment of the control valve. If none of those adjustments did any good, you'd suspect something inside, which calls for taking the unit out of the car.
That's the right sequence to follow. In fact, always check backlash between the rack and sector gears before you make any other adjustment on this coaxial unit.
It's that important, hey?
You bet it is, Butch. If backlash isn't right, no amount of control valve adjusting will do any good.
You'll find that backlash adjustment procedure all spelled out in this reference book, Butch. There's a good step-by-step method to follow.
Swell, Tech. I can use that book.
Once you've got the backlash under control, you can go ahead with any other adjustments that might be needed. Got any other conditions in mind?
Yeah. Suppose an owner reports that steering's too easy in one direction and too hard in the other. You might call it plain hard steering or poor returnability.
Well, that probably means the control valve isn't centered in the piston. You know that the control valve must be properly centered in the piston so the car will steer a straight course and respond correctly to turning in both directions. When the control valve is properly centered, it permits an equal flow of oil to both ends of the piston so that no steering movement is obtained until called for. If the valve isn't centered, more pressure is applied to one end of the piston than to the other. So the front wheels try to turn in one direction or the other.
I see. Would have to adjust the control valve, huh?
Right. And now you can adjust the control valve while the unit's on the car.
Well, that I understand. But I could still use some help on how to make that adjustment.
Well, Butch, to adjust the control valve, you just remove the steering wheel, then the upper jacket and steering tube, and the coupling retaining screw in the end of the worm shaft. That's to give you access to the valve rod. Then you disconnect the steering linkage by using this puller to remove the steering arm from the gear shaft. Always use the puller so you don't damage the gear shaft or bearings. Next, for adjustment purposes, you temporarily install another steering arm on the gear shaft. Tighten the arm nut to 100 foot-pounds. Next, insert this adjusting tool through the center of the worm shaft and onto the tip of the control valve rod. Tap it down lightly to make a firm connection. Then start the engine. With the steering arm in straight-ahead position, see if it takes the same torque to move the gear shaft to either side from the center position.
If the torque is different, turn the control valve adjusting tool to make the torque equal. But be careful. A little movement of that valve tool goes a long way.
Okay, Tech, I'll be careful.
While we're on adjustments, Butch, the reference book has a new and simplified procedure for adjusting the control valve in 1954 model coaxial steering units.
Good. I can use that information.
That's what we want you to do, Butch. Read that reference book. Now, if somebody will turn this record over, we'll go ahead with our story.
Well, aligning this new unit and adjusting the control valve certainly have been made easy to do. Will there be anything to watch out for on the hydraulic end?
If you're wondering about checking for an occasional oil leak, Lloyd's got a good point to keep in mind.
Yeah, Butch. We want to be sure we know the difference between oil leakage and oil seepage. An oil spot on the driveway or oil drops on the outside of the gear housing doesn't necessarily mean there's an oil leak. The only real way to tell leakage from seepage is when the owner reports he's always having to add oil to the reservoir to keep the level up to where it belongs. That's leakage.
Yeah, Butch. But what about that occasional case where you notice oil coming from between the worm and gear housings?
Well, that's not necessarily leakage. It may be strictly the result of a flexing of the housings because of momentary high pressure. And sometimes the gear housing gets overfilled with fluid to the point where some of it works out the vent hole.
I get you. Got to make sure that the reservoir has had to have fluid added several times before we're sure there's actually a leak.
That's right. So when you're satisfied that there is a leak, you should check pump pressure to see if extremely high pressure might have been the cause. So, with the reservoir filled to its proper level, install this pressure gauge with the shut-off valve open. Start the engine and let it warm up properly. Now, we want to check maximum pressures in the hydraulic system. For one thing, we'll want to know what pressure the pump will develop. So, Close the shutoff valve in the gauge for a few seconds with the engine running at idle speed. The pressure should immediately go up to between 750 and 800, but no higher.
Make these high-pressure tests carefully. Don't leave that shutoff valve closed more than a few seconds at a time. You'll heat up the pump and damage it.
Never run a test with the engine speed higher than 1500 RPM. At that speed, the pressure may go up to about 900.
What harm is there in too high a pressure?
Excessive pressure will flex the housings even more than normal and cause an actual leak instead of only seepage.
Tech's right. If the pressure goes past 900 pounds at 1500 RPM, you'll have to replace the flow and relief valve assembly.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
Fine. Now, if there is a leak that allows pressure to force oil out the vent hole in the worm housing, you'll have to remove the unit for disassembly.
How would that pressure oil get up into the worm housing, Lloyd?
There are 3 points where oil could get by, Butch. It could be at the O-ring on the upper end of the control valve rod, the reaction valve control spacer seal, or the housing head oil seal.
So, you just replace the seal, or O-ring, as the case may be, and put the job back together, right?
No, Butch, wrong. Whenever you have a power steering unit disassembled, you replace all the seals and O-rings. Why take chances?
Tech's right. Play it safe. Just one leak and you'll have the job to do over again.
Okay. I'll install new seals throughout.
One more point, Butch. Coat a new seal or O-ring with Mopar lubriplate before you install it. It prevents damage to the seal and makes the job a lot easier.
Good deal, Tech. I'll remember that.
Incidentally, if you ever have to replace the reaction control valve spacer seal, there's an improved seal available. It has a silver-colored M on the outside diameter. This is the only one you should use.
We'd be way ahead of the game, Lloyd, if everybody would scrap the old type reaction seals. Nobody should use anything but the seal with the silver M.
Right, Tech. Now let's cover leaks you can fix while the unit's on the car. Take the gear housing cover O-ring on the Plymouth and Dodge as our first example. First, wipe off all the dirt from the cover area. Next, remove the lock nut from the gear shaft adjusting screw. Then, remove the snap ring. Turn the screw into the cover to raise the cover. Hold the cover level as you turn the screw to keep it from cocking in the housing. Finally, lift out the cover and remove both the cover O-ring and the O-ring from the adjusting screw.
And when you install a new O-ring on that screw, use this thread protector to keep that O-ring from being chewed up.
Okay, Tech. And I'll coat that ring with lubricant.
That's the idea, Butch. Then roll it over the protector and into the groove in the screw. Finally, remove the protector. Coat the new cover O-ring and place it in the groove in the cover. Install the cover by turning the adjusting screw into it. Remember to keep tapping the cover lightly. That keeps it lined up and allows it to be forced into the housing. After that, install the snap ring with the tapered side up.
You make it pretty clear, Lloyd. How about the same operation on the Chrysler and DeSoto cover?
Well, the cover in that case is held by 3 cap screws and lock washers. So that's what you remove after wiping away any dirt in the area. Turn in the gear shaft adjusting screw and lift off the cover and gasket. Discard the gasket and the O-ring on the adjusting screw. Coat the new gasket with Mopar lubriplate and install it in place. Install a new O-ring on the adjusting screw and reinstall the cover. Turn the gear shaft adjusting screw into the cover as far as it'll go. This will ensure seating the cover on the gasket. Torque up those cap screws to 30 foot-pounds. You're going to have to readjust the rack and sector backlash before the job is finished.
Okay. How about replacing that housing end plug O-ring?
Well, carefully wipe the lower end of the housing clean first. Remove the retaining snap ring next. Then drill and tap a hole in the center of the plug so you can install a bolt to withdraw the plug.
Coat your drill with heavy grease to keep those metal cuttings from getting into the housing, Butch.
Good idea, Tech. Will do.
Yeah, and draw that plug straight out so you won't damage the housing. The O-ring will come out with the plug and you can discard both parts. On a new end plug and O-ring, coat the ring with Mopar lubriplate and roll it into the groove in the plug. Coat the plug edges with a non-hardening sealer. Insert the plug in the housing and push it into place. Finally, install the snap ring.
When you want to replace the gear shaft oil seal, be sure to use the puller to remove the steering arm from the gear shaft, Butch.
Oh, yeah. Never use a wedge to remove that arm or you'll damage that gear. Then remove the lock wire so you can remove the seal by using this seal remover. Be particularly careful when you install the new seal. Lubricate the new seal. Place it lip side down on clean paper. Install the tapered sleeve end of this tool into the seal so the seal's back on the sleeve about 1/4 inch. Then with the lip toward the housing, slide the seal over the shaft end until it contacts the counterbore. Install the tool adapter over the sleeve and push the seal into position. Install the tool coupling nut over the shaft threads and turn it until the adapter shoulder contacts the housing. Then remove the nut and adapter. Wrap the sleeve with tape. Get a good grip on it. Twist it and remove it from the shaft. Install the lock wire, then the steering arm, washer, and nut. Tighten that nut to about 100 foot-pounds.
I got you, Lloyd. And thanks. With you and Tech in my corner, I feel I can take good care of these new power steering units.
Glad to hear that, Butch. If you and all our mechanics service our new cars with confidence, our customers will naturally have more confidence in us.